Miles Upshur is an investigative reporter and the protagonist of Outlast, as well as a secondary character in Outlast, Whistleblower. He arrives to investigate the Mount Massive Asylum based on a lead he receives from an anonymous source. According to a document in the beta version of Whistleblower, Miles originally worked as an ordinary journalist for an unknown company before being fired. This was because Miles submitted material on Afghanistan showing the real situation there, and the company did not like that. Since then, Miles has been freelancing as an investigative journalist. Before leaving to investigate Mount Massive Asylum, Upshur lived in an apartment in Washington, D.C. Looking to jumpstart his career, he receives an email from a Murkoff Corporation employee reporting inhumane acts taking place at the asylum. Miles is interested in the case and continues talking to the whistleblower to find out more. Miles decides to go to the asylum after the last email sent by the whistleblower saying that people are getting hurt and Murkoff is profiting from it. He had investigated the corporation before going to the asylum and found out that it had a history of inhumane research under the guise of charitable acts, but never on American soil, and that the patients at the asylum were simply mentally ill people whose families did not care and Murkoff paid for their treatment. The Mount Massive Asylum had been reopened by Murkoff in 2009, using the same excuse that the corporation used, a charitable organization. When he arrives there, he finds the main gate open, but none of the doors were open. There were also armored cars at the entrance, and he had no way into the asylum. He manages to use a window to enter the place and soon finds the place destroyed, with shelves and other furniture lying on the floor, signs of a fight, lots of blood and corpses everywhere. Miles uses his camera to film everything and has enough evidence to incriminate Murkoff when he sees some guards hung and several heads lying around, placed on shelves. One of the guards tells Miles that they were attacked by the variants and that he could open the main door through the security room and get out of that damned place. When Miles leaves the room, he is confronted by a huge, deformed man who throws him from the second to the first floor and he passes out. When Miles wakes up, a priest appears and calls him an apostle and then leaves, asking him to take care because he needed to live and witness what was happening in the place. Miles finally gets up and manages to regain consciousness. His destination was the security room, which, luckily for him, was close by, but on the way, he sees several messages painted in blood on the walls, and Miles fears that it is the priest who is doing this and for his own benefit. When he tries to access the control of the doors, the priest appears on one of the security cameras, turning off the lights. This triggers several prisoners being held in the mental institution, something Miles wouldn't know until later, and he has to go down to the basement to turn the power back on. Before he could leave the room, the big guy, Chris Walker, as Miles discovers from a document he found near the security room, shows up again, looking for Miles. Miles manages to escape from Walker and reconnects the power, but when he returns to the computer, the priest knocks him out with a drug, telling him that he cannot leave yet and that he must witness Mr. Wallrider imposing his truth on the unbelievers. Miles wakes up in a cell, completely graffitied with blood and with the words "Rest in Peace" on the wall. When he comes out of the cell, he realizes that he is in a prison block of the asylum and finds out that the priest had asked the prisoners there not to kill him and that a Dr. Wernicke was responsible for something that went wrong at the asylum, but that he'd also died a decade ago before he even worked at Mount Massive. Miles continues his attempt to get out of the place and witnesses more barbarities and keeps recording them to strengthen the evidence against Murkoff. He finds himself having to follow blood trails that the priest left behind to supposedly help him. This leads him to the sewers of the madhouse, where Miles confronts Chris Walker once again. When he exits the sewer, Miles makes his way to the men's ward, since it was either to go her way or the women's ward, which was barred. Arriving there, Miles soon finds himself in a chase. Some madmen who were torturing a prisoner were out to kill Miles as well, who escapes through a small freight elevator listening to the briefing of a man who seemed friendly. The man was upstairs waiting for Miles and turns out to be just as cruel as his pursuers. He knocks Miles down and locks him in a wheelchair, where he takes him 2 floors up to the exit to the asylum's garden. There, Miles witnesses some experiments that this doctor has done. He sees several men deformed and without parts, including one without a tongue. The doctor takes Miles to a room where he tortures him, cutting off his right index finger and his left ring finger, and then leaves. When Miles manages to break free and get his camera, he hears from one of the victims that this doctor, Richard Trager, was one of the big guys at Murkoff, just like him, but before he can finish, Trager shows up and kills him. Miles takes the chance to escape and is met with more brutalities from Trager. When he gets the key to the elevator that leads to the garden, Trager tries to kill him. Miles, however, manages to fight back and kills Trager by crushing him between the elevator and the floor above. After killing Trager, Miles meets with Father Martin Archambault, who asks him to meet him outside, and he would have to pass through the garden to do so. He then makes his way to the garden and comes across a fire in the kitchen caused by one of the variants who would rather burn to death than stay in the madhouse. Miles manages to put out the fire after confronting Walker again and makes his way to the garden. Miles arrives at the garden, and besides the corpses and Walker again, he finds the Wallrider. The Wallrider was a project that Murkoff was doing, but the interns saw him as a god, a physical presence, and Miles saw him. He manages to get out of the garden and meets up with Martin, who was one floor above Miles, and he must again find a way up. He makes it to the third floor, where Martin had arranged for them to meet, and Miles sees a trail of blood to follow. He follows it without any problems, and after confronting Walker once more, he manages to find Martin in a small chapel, nailed to a cross and surrounded by faithful followers. He asks Miles to record his death and spread the gospel to everyone, and Miles promises that he will tell everyone. Before he dies, the priest says he has fixed the elevator in the administration block and that Miles can use it to get out of there. Miles manages to use the elevator after escaping from Walker one last time, but instead of the elevator stopping at the exit, it goes further down into the underground lab, where Miles sees several corpses of soldiers killed by Wallrider and accepts that he is dead. He continues walking forward and sees that it has already dawned and that a huge garage near the laboratory was full of recent military armored vehicles. As he continues walking, Miles encounters Wallrider and tries to run away, but Walker appears and prevents him from continuing, but Wallrider kills Walker brutally, and Miles records the soldier's death. He takes advantage of Wallrider's disappearance and leaves. On the way, he finds a room, and inside of it is Rudolph G. Wernicke, responsible for the Wallrider project and also for part of what happened at Mount Massive. He explains that he didn't die and that Wallrider's host, Billy Hope, was protecting him from danger, probably because he saw him as his father. But Dr. Wernicke didn't want that. He wanted Billy dead and Wallrider to follow suit and asks Miles to kill him. He was supposed to turn off Billy's life support, which was in the control room of the lab, and Miles manages to do this, but at the last second, as Billy was dying, the Wallrider appears and throws Miles across the room, and in the end, he disappears. Miles begins to hear voices and, still limping, manages to get to the end of the hallway, where behind a door was Rudolph Wernicke and his private soldiers, who shoot Miles to death. However, a loud noise is heard from Wallrider and all the others as they, at long last, die. So that was the story of Miles in the first game. If you think we missed something, feel free to express your thoughts in the comment section. Thank you for watching this until the end. Father Loudermilch is seen at several points throughout Blake's nightmares laughing, humming, talking, and mocking him. Over time, Blake begins to perceive Loudermilch as a demon. This is evidenced by a red birthmark above his right eye, which the demon also carries. Loudermilch is a tall, thin, middle-aged man with pale brown eyes, a receding black hairline, and a prominent birthmark on his forehead. He wears a priest's robe and a plain black clerical shirt stuffed into his black pants, with a corresponding belt around his waist. Loudermilch, like the monster, is bare and smeared with blood from head to toe. He has numerous limbs, an inhumanly large and piercing tongue, and lacks a nose, jaw, and lips. After Blake nears a well in the village, the demon's tongue pulls him down. As Blake winds up Jessica's music box and discovers her hanging, the demon's tongue emerges and pulls Jessica toward the ceiling. Within another hallucination, Blake wanders down a long, dim hallway when all the lockers suddenly begin to open and close wildly as Loudermilch's echoes ring out. As Blake approaches a door leading out, the demon pops up and tosses him to the end of the hallway. Blake abruptly appears in a locker. Father Loudermilch is standing in front of the locker and moves away. Blake unlocks the locker and begins to walk through the school when he becomes aware that a computer is on in one of the rooms. He pops open an email. "I took Miss Gray out of physical education today to have a little talk with her. Father Loudermilch was telling me he's worried that she's a touch more sensitive than is good for her. And I don't doubt it, poor girl. I know you've dealt with her dad and his big personality, And her mother was a real tragedy, God rest her soul. But anyway, Father Loudermilch says he thinks it might not be a good idea for Jessica to go on the field trip to the piano factory, and I tend to agree. She seems like a decent risk of a runaway. On top of which, her father's signature on the permission slip is a little embarrassing in what an obvious forgery it is. So, I'll need your say-so to suspend permission. We'll put her on library study for that day. Later, Loudermilch is heard singing a song with Jessica. When Blake later returns, a phone is heard ringing inside one of the offices. As Blake comes closer, the demon jumps out and runs towards Blake. Blake tries to conceal himself and the demon disappears. Upon walking back, Blake picks up the phone and a familiar voice is heard from the other end.
Hello? Hello? Oh, thank God you're alive. I need you to stay calm. We're going to get you help. We'll get you out of there. I want you to find a place to hide. Someplace safe where you can remember the taste of her kiss when you felt her neck break, you diseased cocksucker.
The tongue then pokes out of the phone, grabbing Blake by the neck. Blake then tosses the phone away, and the tongue vanishes. As Blake exits the office, all the doors bang shut violently, and the demon reappears, pursuing Blake. In the following hallucination, Blake wanders underneath the school, into a system of hallways, where all the pipes and cables are located. He works his way through a hallway, when the demon pops up and chases him. Blake is rowing across a lake, when the tongue sticks out of the water and sucks Blake inside. He sees another vision of the demon running after him, this time it is in the school swimming pool. He figures out a way to the stairs, where another pursuit follows. Now that he's in the school library, Blake weaves his way through a confusing maze of bookshelves, when the demon springs up at the end. When Blake first hears Jessica's screams, he turns and sprints towards her, with the demon trailing behind him. After Blake tumbles into a pile of bodies, he lies on top of Jessica at the stairs. She is visibly bruised, and her neck is broken. The player can see the demon at the top of the stairs watching Blake. As Blake rushes through the school, Loudermilch taunts him. When Blake and Jessica emerge from their hiding place in the kitchen, Loudermilch comes out of one of the doors. He interrogates Blake and Jessica about their current whereabouts in the school at that moment, while telling them to re-enter the classroom. He threatens Blake and Jessica that he will speak to their parents. He orders Blake to leave, but as he makes his way to the outside, he hears Jessica shouting for help. He races back to the classroom, where he can see that Jessica and Loudermilch are missing. Jessica is hurt in what is assumed to be a fight with Loudermilch, and then Blake finds her brutally beaten corpse lying on the stairs. And it can be assumed, during that moment, that Loudermilch coerced Blake into a cover-up of her death. Sullivan Noth was born in 1933 or 1937. Given the inconsistent information regarding his birth year, it can only be estimated. In 1966, he was employed as a shoe salesman in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Throughout these years, Noth suffered from financial problems and was on the verge of losing his business property due to large amounts of debt that he couldn't cover. Hopeless, Sullivan turned to a late-night evangelical talk radio station for consolation, but found no relief in the voice speaking out against the evils of extramarital adultery. As he listened to the preacher's discourse, he started to pick up something beneath the static, which he claimed was the very voice of God. The voice of God echoed Sullivan in his unhappiness with the world and its many churches, claiming that he would need a new and valiant preacher. The man went out into the night and beheld, in the dark sky, a prediction like that of the prophet Ezekiel, a dreadful, multi-sided heavenly creature that was crowned up in a fire, encircled by wheels within wheels. The vision bore a prediction about Sullivan, that he would usher a chosen few into paradise and deliver them from eternal condemnation before the end of time. Brimming with purpose, Sullivan forsook all his worldly belongings and set out to sermonize on the city streets of Albuquerque. His inspiration drew in people who were lost in the world and looked to him for counsel. Over the years, he gained several dozen adherents, all of whom had contributed their assets to a new church, nicknamed the Testament of New Ezekiel. They resided on a luxurious cattle ranch owned by a wealthy lady named Lydia Deegan. Sullivan would continue to hear messages from the Lord, which he faithfully documented in a verse book he entitled, The Gospel of Noth. Sullivan would often highly encourage all women in the cult to reproduce regularly, even by donating his own seed for the cause and hand-delivering each baby in person. The deliveries at home gave New Mexico law enforcement the needed power to take measures targeting the cult. With a warrant for their arrest on charges of health and safety regulations, police stormed Deegan's homestead and rounded up about a dozen members of the cult. Knoth, in the meantime, narrowly fled with a fistful of cultists. All their assets were seized, and the cult faced a severe risk of imminent collapse. After the guidance of Moses and Abraham, Sullivan ascended a mountain by himself to commune with God. He stood on the mountaintop, bare naked in the wilderness, and waited for the voice to instruct him to have an eye sacrificed in return for his true vision. After listening to that, he unsheathed his knife and pierced his left eyeball. Through this deed, the very veil of reality fell away, and Knoth foresaw the destiny of his church with utmost certitude. He foresaw a village, hidden deep in the desert and concealed from human civilization, that would be the doorway to the very temple of the Testament of New Ezekiel. He would name this town Temple Gate and bring his disciples up there to make ready for the end of the ages. Knoth cautioned his flock that the journey would be long and the hardships would be many, and that all would be forced to make painful trade-offs and impossible decisions in the hope of eternal salvation and heaven. It was the winter of 1969 when Sullivan Noth and nearly 100 supporters departed by caravan for the wilderness. In 1971, Knoth and his cohorts arrived at the site that would later develop into Temple Gate. The village was based in a remote area of the Havasupai Indian Reservation, where the tribesmen forcibly drove out the Pueblo, Jicanilla, Mescalero, and Navajo Indians who lived in the zone that Knoth had attempted to seize. In the Gospels, Knoth is skeptical about certain things. The speaker of the Gospels tells him that the Antichrist will be birthed from his own followers. After a time, Knoth is urged to slaughter the children in order to spare the paradise of Temple Gate. In a similar vein, it's conceivable that Knoth has sworn vows of celibacy, or, at the very least, to not wed. He is attracted to multiple women and is at a loss as to how to navigate his appetites. The voice, nevertheless, instructs him that he can have sex with the women in his herd. In fact, the Gospels show that the New Testament of Ezekiel does not outlaw that sin. It actually encourages men to engage in fornication with their daughters as long as their mothers are no longer alive. Under these practices, Knoth also violated and knocked up a 15-year-old Anna Lee, who is Ethan's daughter, and is later shot and killed by Pauline Glick in a hospital, becoming the Jane Doe who sends Lynn and Blake to Temple Gate. While Knoth's looming presence and influential role in Temple Gate is the lifeblood of the entire story, he is hardly ever seen. Most of his participation in the storyline is restricted to his passionate screams and gospel, which resonate throughout Temple Gate via the loudspeakers, or his demented disciples alluding to said works. His voice can be distinctly heard as he torments Lynn Langerman, a kidnapped journalist whose womb he assumes to be harboring the Antichrist. Later in the game, Lynn's husband Blake barges into the temple and hides in one of the confession booths, witnessing Knoth and his entourage as they violently torment a husband and his wife to extract the whereabouts of Lynn, who has fled the scene recently. Upon discovering that she is in the mines with the heretics, a faction that has deserted the Testament and wants the Antichrist to be birthed, Knoth brings the two of them painlessly out of their misery. Knoth also suffers from syphilis. Blake read that, in a piece of letter, someone wrote about the goings of some religious cultists to the external world to get gasoline, penicillin, and other amenities. Knoth has been lying to his parish congregation and has said that the penicillin is for his AIDS studies. But because Knoth engages in unsafe intercourse with numerous of the females in the cult, he has spread it to others. While a rumor flies about that he could have syphilis and gonorrhea at the same time, Knoth forces them to go to a segregated campsite. His excuse is telling the afflicted that they are aggrieved with a sickness of the soul that only the right penance can redeem. Shortly after, these people become the scalded. At the game's end, Knoth has one last encounter with Blake after Lynn passes away during childbirth in the church. Knoth informs Blake that he has butchered the entire town and failed in his mission, that it's too little too late, and that the Antichrist has already been reborn, meaning that the apocalypse is now imminent. Noth is bitter, saying that God has grown silent after the torment, and that he speaks with him no longer, strongly implicating that the God was radio's signals beamed from the towers owned by the Murkoff Corporation. He becomes conflicted after killing his offspring and those of his disciples, thus declaring that there can be no more faultless faith than that, only to find himself still mystified by the silence of his God. He had assumed that God would not forsake him or stay silent after his sacrifices. Obligated by his own creed, he does not indulge in killing Blake's infant son and, instead, implores him to murder the newborn. As he descends further into madness, he states ruefully, "I know God doesn't hear dead men, but I expect he answers them," before slitting his own throat. Only hours before his death, Noth is revealed to be poisoning his own flock with glasses of cyanide, under the promise that their children will be watching over them. As those events develop, the colony of ants inhabited by the Wallrider starts to swarm the radio towers until they are destroyed and a storm comes. After several hours following the incident, Pauline Glick and several Murkoff agents conduct an investigation into the consequences of the fallout. They remove Noth's remains while grumbling about his weight. Pauline remarks that his death was not the result of cyanide poisoning, and one of the agents next to her replies that some got inventive when it came to their deaths. Meanwhile, Simon Peacock mentions Noth amid his interrogation of Paul Marion, ruminating on the fact that Murkoff absolutely needed a delivery mechanism for the morphogenic engine to spread the so-called infection. It turns out that Noth's cult fitted that purpose like a glove. By the end, Simon weighs in on the madness Murkoff wrought to the Holy Trinity, labeling Rudolf Wernicke as the Father, the Wallrider as the Son, and Sullivan Noth as the Holy Spirit. As a boy, Blake Langerman attended St. Sybil's Catholic School with Lynn and Jessica Gray, with whom he was very close. Blake has multiple flashbacks of his childhood, in particular, a memory of him playing hide and seek with Jessica after school, where they are surprised by Father Loudermilch, and Blake is forced to leave while Jessica is, under quotes, lectured. Blake returns upon hearing her screams and finds her bloody, mangled corpse on the stairs, with her neck broken. It's implied that Loudermilch killed Jessica and forced Blake to remain silent about it and help him cover it up, crippling him with guilt for the rest of his life. Decades later, Blake became a cameraman working with his journalist wife, Lynn. The couple has been investigating the murder of a young, pregnant woman who hasn't yet been identified. The investigation of the unknown victim ends with the couple wrecking their helicopter in the Supai region of Arizona's Sonoran Desert. Blake is separated from Lynn and must find his way back to her, all the while delving into a town in a rural area where the residents are concerned that the end of days is, at last, upon them. While seeking Lynn, Blake finds the helicopter pilot skinned, disemboweled, and tied to a tree branch, which hints at the danger they are facing. A group of hostile villagers attacks Blake and attempts to kill him before he can reunite with his wife. Lynn has, in the meantime, become entangled with the self-identified prophet Sullivan Knoth, who insists that Lynn is carrying Blake's child and describes him as the Antichrist. This propels a citywide manhunt to track down Lynn and kill her before the child is born. The resulting confrontation between the two cults, one with Christian beliefs and the other with satanic inclinations, ends with Lynn kidnapped and Blake left to find her, followed by further investigation of Temple Gate. It turns out that the slain, pregnant woman was the daughter of Ethan, a follower of Noth, who was violated and knocked up by the preacher. Ethan graciously takes Blake in, claiming he is too traumatized by the horrors of Temple Gate to continue following his faith, but he's killed within hours of Blake's arrest by Marta, who is Noth's enforcer. Blake is then chased through the city until he arrives at Temple Gate's main shrine, where he spies on the gruesome questioning of two heretics who finally confess to Noth that Lynn is being kept in the mines, a scene that gives Blake a new target. On his way there, Blake falls off a bridge and gets kidnapped by a dwarven archer named Laird and his companion named Nick, both of whom are leaders of the Scald outcasts. Blake is then anointed as the Scalded Messiah, and Laird insists on rebirthing Blake through crucifixion and live burial. Against all odds, Blake escapes both dangers and flees the forest. By this point, his childhood delusions have become incredibly vivid, even nightmarish and more intense, and at the end, Blake has been driven completely insane by his guilt over Jessica's fate. Nevertheless, he presses on and finally arrives at an elevator that leads him to the mines, where the heretics are keeping Lynn with them. Pursued by the heretics and their leader Val through the caverns, Blake finally encounters Lynn, who is in the last months of her pregnancy, only to be caught in a sickening orgy of blood that is interrupted by the Testament. He kills the heretics and chases the Langermans out of the mines amid a thunderstorm. They take shelter in the chapel, where Lynn gives birth to their child and promptly dies of shock. Blake bursts into tears and faints with the infant in his arms, waking up to Noth announcing that he has had the entire town killed due to his failure to stop the birth, and begs Blake to kill the child before slitting his own throat. Blake, with his baby in a swathe, walks through the horrific, war-torn remains of Temple Gate when the sun appears and engulfs the entire planet, just as Noth had predicted in the birth of the Antichrist. The apocalypse Blake had witnessed, as well as the nightmarish recollections of his childhood, were just hallucinations produced by the Murkoff Corporation's local radio towers. Hours after the Temple Gate slaughter, Pauline Glick and other Murkoff agents begin their research on the fallout. Two agents in hazmat suits uncover a man still breathing, albeit in a catatonic state, and pull him out of a small shed. Pauline soon realizes that the man is, in fact, Blake, and immediately orders the agents to take him to a Murkoff black site known as the Elrich facility for a barbaric interrogation. Before the story finally ends, it's clearly pointed out Lynn's son is nowhere to be seen. As Miles Upshur tries to access the security checkpoint to open Mount Massive Asylum's main doors, Father Martin injects a sedative in him. While Miles loses consciousness, he manages to see on the monitor, through one of the underground laboratory's security cameras, when the Wallrider tears apart some Murkoff's agents who had entered the laboratory. A few minutes later, Miles passes out. The Wallrider is seen again as Miles passes through the prison showers in the form of a blurred silhouette, and once again in the sewers. After some time walking around and as Miles goes up a staircase, two patients can be heard fleeing from the Wallrider, only to be killed by him. He reappears in the courtyard flying through the air, and once again Miles finds him, this time behind a locked gate. In the documents found during the game, it's explained that the Wallrider project is a process of exposing patients to the morphogenic engine to create a host for the cloud. To accomplish that, the subject must experience a certain number of horrors. Apparently, the variants are the result of these experiments. Billy was the only one able to control the Wallrider by self-directing his lucid dreams. However, because they were using only people with mental problems, the situation spiraled out of control, and the Wallrider ended up managing to escape, killing many of the staff and triggering a major prison break. At the end of the game, Miles arrives at the labs, where he saw the Wallrider kill several of Murkoff's agents. The Cloud then chases Upshur through most of the place, killing Chris Walker in the process. Miles subsequently disables Billy's life support, killing him, but the Wallrider brutally attacks him and merges with his body, taking the journalist as his new host. As Miles crawls to the exit, Dr. Rudolph Wernicke, along with some Murkoff agents, shoot and kill him, while Wernicke realizes that Miles has become the new host. The game ends with the screen going black as the Wallrider is heard murdering the soldiers. Whether Wernicke shared that fate or not is unknown. The Wallrider appears again in Whistleblower, this time as a secondary enemy. Although he appears, at first glance, to be a ghost, the Wallrider is actually a cloud of very small machines that possess great strength and power. He took possession of William Hope, a patient at Mount Massive Psychiatric Hospital. Hope was able to control him by self-directing his lucid dreams while undergoing the morphogenic engine therapy. As Waylon Park escapes from confinement in the hospital, the Wallrider appears and kills the two patients who were locked up with him. Minutes later, it resurfaces and attacks him, ceasing to follow him when Waylon enters a room where patients had murdered a doctor. The Cloud reappears moments later, following Waylon into a decontamination chamber, after which it can only be seen as a silhouette in several places. In the prison, Park watches as the Wallrider chases two patients into a room, locking them up and killing them. In the drying ground, the Wallrider appears in one of the corridors leading to the water tower, ignoring Waylon completely. After escaping, Park sees several Murkoff agents in the men's pavilion, and on one of the radios, he manages to hear soldiers being attacked by an unknown assailant in the lab, who is Miles possessed by the Wallrider. Arriving at the exit, Waylon finds Jeremy Blair wounded at the exit door. Park ignores Blair's pleas for help, which in turn leads to Blair stabbing him in the abdomen. But before he can finish him off, the Wallrider appears, lifting the executive into the air and tearing him apart. Waylon finally arrives at Miles' abandoned jeep, and as he enters it, he manages to spot a black cloud at the entrance of the asylum. Park grabs the video camera for a closer look, and it turns out that the silhouette is Miles crawling towards the exit. Waylon immediately starts the jeep, making his way through the front doors of the asylum and speeding towards freedom. In issue number 3 of Outlast, the Murkoff account, it is revealed that, despite being killed by Miles, the Wallrider possessed Billy's body and went to Tiffany Hope's trailer, who was his mother. After Tiffany was torn apart by the swarm, Billy's body was destroyed in an explosion. Nevertheless, the Wallrider survived it, switching hosts with a colony of ants. Still controlling the ants, the Wallrider travels to the outskirts of Temple Gate, specifically to the Murkoff Corporation's radio towers, destroying them and causing the microwaves to malfunction, locking the towers in a flash of light. Since then, he's never been heard of again. It's a known fact that, before the original game, Dr. Richard Trager worked in the psychology department of the game's asylum. He also held the position of business developer at Mount Massive, where he met Jeremy Blair, with whom he maintained a great friendship. The large money he amassed working for the Murkoff Corporation allowed him to afford certain luxuries, such as a wine cellar in his home and a small stash of cocaine that he secretly stored in his studio. Outlast, the Murkoff account also reveals the sexual abuse suffered by several Trager employees, ranging from the maid, Denise, to several other Murkoff workers at the hospital. When Paul Marion and Pauline Glick went to his home, in a state of alert after an employee of Choro Trager had sent an email talking about Murkoff's underdealings, Rick refused to acknowledge that there could be a snitch among his men. Under the light of that pretense, Glick decided to investigate Trager more closely, only to end up being drugged with flunitrazepam. The mitigation department took it upon themselves to take Michelle Haas to a hospital, fearing she would be taken to an abortion clinic. Upon getting there, they were intercepted by Trager, who attacked the woman with scissors. Shortly after, he was arrested and taken back to Mount Massive Psychiatric Hospital. This time, however, he was a patient. Upon arriving at the asylum, Dr. Trager is mentioned only a few times throughout the game. When Miles is caught by him, just as he escapes from his henchman via the forklift, he catches him a floor above and ties him to a wheelchair. In that same place, Trager grabs large pliers and amputates the index finger of Miles' right hand and the ring finger of his left one. Trager exits the scene, leaving Miles alone. Struggling against the wheelchair, Miles manages to free himself and makes it to the elevator. Miles looks for a key on that floor of the male ward and ends up getting chased several times by Trager, who was armed with a pair of scissors. A metal fence blocked by a gas cylinder truck separates the wing in which Upshur is located from the elevator. Once the obstacle is removed, Miles notices that the elevator requires a key to operate. Trager had followed him. To evade him, Miles marches through the intricate corridors of the ward to take refuge in a ventilation shaft, searching for the key to the elevator. Trager, in the meantime, had started to break open the door next to it. Miles Upshur turns around, facing the direction of the conduit, ducks into a bathroom stall in the corner, and waits for Trager to come closer before stepping over it again and heading back to where the key was. Upon getting there, he goes through a door destroyed by Trager and reaches the elevator. When he manages to make it work, it begins to descend until Trager intercepts him on a lower floor. Miles still manages to defend himself from his attacker and pushes him off, leaving the doctor with half of his torso in the elevator, crushed between the floor of the building and the ceiling of the machine. In the Outlast Whistleblower expansion, Trager reappears but is already dead on the ground as several agents from Murkoff's tactical division examine his corpse. They indirectly blame Upshur and pin the murder on him. Trager is a very optimistic and kind man, constantly making jokes without losing his composure. Like the rest of the inmates of the asylum, Rick shows symptoms of psychosis and that he enjoys punishing other people. His mental capacity seems to operate in a highly superior and functional way to the rest of the inmates in the asylum, which is another proof that he still has a good grasp of the reality around him. Because of this, he can think, plan, and even lure Miles to enter the forklift. In the comic Outlast, the Murkoff account, Trager indicates that he is of Italian origins and has a large wine bar in his home, offering Pauline one of his favorite wines. The fact that the doctor is constantly obsessed with making money and profits shows how the Wallrider project and the morphogenetic engine couldn't deteriorate his mind completely. He knows how to maintain his amiable personality and can easily fool victims before harvesting their organs and limbs, hoping to make money from the subsequent sale of those parts. On several occasions, he uses friendly and taunting terms to refer to Miles. It's one of the many aspects about him that show his true intelligence. Despite being in his early 40s, Trager looks a lot older, due in large part to his haggard appearance and bony torso. In Outlast, the Murkoff account, Trager appeared with graying hair slicked back, wearing a pink shirt accompanied by a blue sweater. His jovial and seductive appearance became older over the years in the underground laboratory as a test subject for the Murkoff Corporation. He only managed to escape when the inmates escaped, which allowed him time and space to perform his operations. When Miles met Richard Trager, he made comments on his attire. It's a tight-fitting white suit with several silver bracket-type connections around the neck, complemented by sequins. It has a silver belt from which a skirt with loose layers in tulle emerges. And the right side is complemented by a tail that exceeds the lower length, made with a combination of white tulle and silver applications. To this day, Dr. Richard Trager remains one of the most memorable characters of the series. Chris Walker was a soldier who was deployed to Afghanistan, which explains his enormous ability to run and fight. After the war, he worked for the Murkoff Corporation as a security guard, manning the security cameras in one of the many surveillance rooms at Murkoff's therapeutic clinic in Texas. It was there that he received the nickname Strong Fat, and where psychological disorders driven by the desire to kill gradually began to surface. Walker, as can be seen, is overweight, although this doesn't prevent him from being one of the most powerful and robust variants, as well as being quite fast, running almost as fast as Miles, and being able to jump over obstacles to reach him, despite not being able to enter narrow spaces. It should be noted that he is also very tall, measuring almost 7 feet. Chris Walker lacks lips, besides having lost much of his nose and part of his forehead, which he himself ripped off. In Outlast, the Murkoff account, Paul and Pauline were sent to investigate a series of murders, discovering that it was Walker himself who condemned 3 inmates to death in the asylum. It was thanks to that Chris Walker was taken to Mount Massive Psychiatric Hospital to be employed within Project Wallrider, dooming his even greater rage and driving him into complete uncontrol, making him the most bloodthirsty variant in the entire mental asylum. Having been chained to his legs and hands, when he escaped he didn't take them off, but rather broke them. His characteristic sound lets you know if Walker is hovering nearby. He wears patient pants and boots as his only clothing. It is noted that whenever Miles hides, he grabs his victim by the neck and then throws him. Walker is capable of ripping someone's head from their body. He seems to like to keep trophies of his victims, such as the heads seen in the room where Stevenson was in the library. He also has a certain level of intelligence, being able to locate Miles in the dark, looking inside lockers and under beds to see if he is hiding there. Throughout the story, Upshur must evade Chris on numerous occasions. One rather interesting feature of Walker is that he can access virtually every place in the building. Here are some of the times he attacks Miles. Walker throwing Miles into the administration block. When Miles leaves the library, where Walker's head collection is, he is seen entering room 205. Even if the player manages to reach him, he won't attack or give chase. A few seconds after Miles spots him, just as he's going through a narrow passage, he grabs Miles and throws him to the first floor of the administration block. When Miles Upshur enters the monitor room, Father Martin turns off the power, so he must go down to the basement to turn it back on. As soon as he gets up from the chair, Chris will enter the security room where he is. If Miles hides in one of the lockers, he will look at the control panel, open one of the lockers where he isn't and leave. If Miles doesn't hide, Chris will see him and chase him around in the room until he gets to the basement, where he will lose sight of him and leave. After being sedated by the priest, Miles wakes up in the asylum prison. As he advances through the cell block, he will see how Walker rips the head off a security guard. He reappears in that same area after escaping the twins' first attack, when Miles must activate one of the green gas sprinklers. Chris will enter that sprinkler and will continuously hit the glass of it to reach Miles. The sprinkler eventually breaks and bursts into flames, pushing Miles through a window a few floors below. Just when he gets up from that fall, Chris will jump into the room where Miles is, ready to attack. Walker returns in the sewers when Miles must lower the water to reach a lower intersection. He will make it difficult for him to find the valves to lower the water. Miles meets him again in the sewers in a flooded and unlit part. The lack of electricity favors him because he will only attack Miles if he gets too close to him or if he starts to climb the stairs to escape from that area. Even if he crouches low and quietly, when he reaches the stairs, Chris will track him down and will not stop chasing him, even if he tries to hide. Once Miles is done with Richard Trager, he must try to put out the fire in the cafeteria that Piero has started. As Miles tries to get to the sprinkler system valve area, Chris Walker reappears. After escaping from him in the outer courtyard, Chris appears again at the entrance to the courtyard of the women's pavilion. When Miles approaches that intersection, Chris will open the gate that led to the subzone where he had previously appeared and attack. When Miles leaves the women's pavilion and enters the administration block, Chris will appear by breaking a door. The way to escape is by entering the second room on the left and sneak into the ventilation duct. After entering the chapel where Father Martin dies, Miles sneaks through a vent towards the elevator. Chris Walker appears for the last time in the underground laboratory, where he dies at the hands of the Wallrider and under the watchful eyes of Miles Upshur. Chris reappears in Outlast, Whistleblower, chasing Waylon on 2 occasions. The first time takes place shortly after Jeremy Blair has destroyed the cell block radio and attempted to kill Park. Hearing Chris Walker approaching, he runs away. As Waylon gets up and leaves the radio room, Chris throws a corpse at a door and bursts it open, and a few moments later, the large variant enters the room. Even if the player isn't spotted, when he tries to leave through the door through which he entered, he will see him and chase him down corridors until he manages to pass through a narrow passageway. The second time, when the protagonist passes through a dark corridor, he will open a door and chase the first until he jumps through a window and falls on the roof of a building, landing outside the cell block. Chris Walker eventually dies at the hands of the Wallrider while trying to attack Miles. The reason why the Wallrider saves Miles at that moment is still unknown,